The storm had been brewing for hours, a dark, ominous cloud that seemed to swallow the sky whole. Now it was upon them, a tempest of wind, rain, and thunder that shook the very foundations of the old farmhouse. The wind howled like a banshee, rattling the windows and doors, while the rain lashed against the roof, sounding like 1,000 tiny hammers. Inside, Sarah huddled under a blanket, her heart pounding in her chest. She had always been afraid of thunderstorms, but tonight, the fear was almost paralyzing. The thunder was particularly loud, shaking the house to its core. Each clap felt like a violent assault, a reminder of the raw power of nature. As the storm raged on, Sarah began to hear strange noises coming from the attic. At first, she dismissed them as creaking floorboards or settling beams, but as the night wore on, the sounds grew more distinct. There was a scratching sound, like claws raking against wood, followed by a low, guttural growl. Fear gripped Sarah as she realized that the noises were coming from the attic. She knew she should stay in bed, but something compelled her to investigate. Slowly, she got up and crept towards the attic door. Her heart pounded in her ears as she turned the doorknob. The attic was dark and dusty, the only light coming from a small window high above. As Sarah stepped inside, she felt a chill run down her spine. The air was thick with an oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional crack of thunder. She moved cautiously towards the far end of the attic, where she had heard the noises coming from. As she approached, she saw a dark shape huddled in the corner. It was a creature, a monstrous thing with glowing red eyes and sharp, pointed teeth. Its claws raked against the wooden floorboards, leaving deep gouges. Sarah froze, her blood running cold. The creature let out a blood-curdling scream, its voice echoing through the attic. It lunged at her, its claws outstretched. Sarah screamed and scrambled backwards, tripping over a loose floorboard and falling to the ground. The creature was upon her, its claws inches from her face. Just as it was about to strike, a blinding flash of lightning illuminated the attic. A deafening clap of thunder followed, shaking the house violently. The creature let out a howl of pain and disappeared into the darkness. Sarah lay on the floor, trembling with fear. She was alone, surrounded by the wreckage of the storm. The rain had stopped, and the wind had died down, but the silence was almost as terrifying as the storm itself. She knew she would never forget this night, the night she had faced her greatest fear. The morning sun painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, casting long, dancing shadows across the ruined landscape. Sarah lay huddled in the attic, her body aching from the fall. She was cold and hungry, and her mind was racing with fear. Cautiously, she made her way to the attic window and peered out. The storm had passed, leaving behind a trail of destruction. Trees were uprooted, power lines were down, and the once peaceful countryside was now a scene of devastation. Sarah knew she had to get out of the attic, but she was terrified to leave the safety of the house. The thought of encountering the creature again was enough to make her blood run cold. Gathering her courage, she climbed down the ladder and stepped into the hallway. The house was a mess. Broken glass littered the floor, and the smell of damp and decay hung heavy in the air. Sarah made her way to the kitchen, hoping to find something to eat. She rummaged through the cupboards, but everything was either moldy or spoiled. Just as she was about to give up, she heard a noise coming from the basement. Her heart pounded in her chest as she slowly descended the creaky stairs. The basement was dark and damp, and the air was thick with the smell of decay. Sarah fumbled for her phone, hoping to find a flashlight app. Just as she found it, she heard a low growl coming from the darkness. Her blood ran cold as she realized the creature was down here. With trembling hands, she turned on the flashlight and shone it into the darkness. The creature was standing there, its eyes glowing red with hunger. It let out a blood-curdling scream and lunged at her. Sarah screamed and scrambled backwards, tripping over a loose board and falling to the ground. The creature was upon her, its claws inches from her face. Just as it was about to strike, a blinding flash of light filled the basement. The creature let out a howl of pain and disappeared into the darkness. Sarah lay on the floor, panting heavily. She was safe, for now, but she knew that the creature was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. As she climbed out of the basement, she vowed to herself that she would never return to the farmhouse. Sarah stumbled out of the basement, her heart pounding in her chest. She was safe for now, but she knew that the creature was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. As she climbed out of the basement, she vowed to herself that she would never return to the farmhouse. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the ruined landscape. Sarah knew she had to find help, but she was afraid to leave the safety of the house. Gathering her courage, she made her way to the front door and stepped outside. The sight that greeted her was a scene of utter devastation. Trees were uprooted, power lines were down, and the once peaceful countryside was now a wasteland. Sarah could see a small town in the distance, but it was too far to walk. Desperate and alone, Sarah began to wander aimlessly. She stumbled through the wreckage, her mind racing with fear. As darkness fell, she found herself in a dense forest. The trees seemed to close in around her, and the silence was broken only by the eerie creaking of branches. As she walked deeper into the forest, Sarah began to hear strange noises. It was a low, guttural growl, like the sound of a wild animal. Her heart pounded in her chest as she realized she was not alone. Suddenly, a pair of glowing red eyes appeared in the darkness. The creature was upon her, its claws outstretched. Sarah screamed and ran, but it was no use. The creature was faster than she was, and it was closing in. Just as the creature was about to strike, a blinding flash of light illuminated the forest. A deafening roar followed, shaking the ground. The creature let out a blood-curdling scream and disappeared into the darkness. Sarah lay on the ground, panting heavily. She was safe, for now. But she knew that the creature was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. As she looked up at the starry sky, she wondered if she would ever escape the nightmare that had become her life. The following morning, Sarah awoke to the sound of sirens. She climbed to her feet and looked out from the window of the farmhouse. A team of rescue workers was approaching the house. Relief washed over her as she realized she was no longer alone. The rescue workers helped Sarah out of the farmhouse and took her to a nearby shelter. As she sat among the other survivors, she began to realize that she was not the only one who had been affected by the storm. There were others who had lost their homes, their loved ones, and their sense of safety. Sarah knew that she would never forget the terrifying ordeal she had endured. But she also knew that she had survived, and that gave her hope for the future. As she looked out at the rising sun, she vowed to rebuild her life and move on. The thunderstorm. The night was a tempestuous beast, its roar echoing through the ancient creaking house. Rain lashed against the windows, a relentless drumbeat that seemed to pulse in sync with the pounding of Anya's heart. She huddled under a worn blanket, her eyes wide with fear as the thunder crashed overhead, shaking the very foundations of the old place. Anya had always been afraid of thunderstorms. As a child, she'd imagined monstrous creatures lurking in the shadows, their eyes glowing like embers in the darkness. Now as an adult, she knew that her fear was irrational, but it was a fear that had only grown stronger with age. The house, a sprawling Victorian mansion, seemed to take on a life of its own in the storm. The floorboards groaned and creaked, as if haunted by unseen spirits. The wind howled through the chimney, carrying with it eerie, mournful sounds. Anya could almost swear she heard whispers, distant and indistinct, echoing through the empty rooms. She tried to distract herself by reading, but her mind kept wandering back to the terrifying sounds outside. The rain was now accompanied by a strange, rhythmic tapping on the window. Anya got up, her heart pounding in her chest, and cautiously approached the window. Peering through the rain-streaked glass, she saw nothing but a swirling mass of darkness. The tapping continued, growing louder and more insistent. Anya reached out and touched the window, her fingers trembling. Suddenly, the glass shattered, sending shards flying in all directions. A cold draft swept through the room, carrying with it a chilling scent of decay. Anya screamed and backed away from the window. She was frozen in place, her mind racing. What could have caused the glass to break? Was it just the wind, or something more sinister? As if in answer to her question, a shape emerged from the darkness outside. It was a large, humanoid figure, its skin pale and translucent. Its eyes, two glowing orbs of pure darkness, seemed to pierce straight through the rain. Anya gasped, her blood freezing in her veins. The creature moved slowly toward the window, its every step accompanied by a low, guttural growl. Anya backed away, her heart pounding in her chest. She fumbled for her phone, but it was nowhere to be found. She was trapped, alone in the dark with the terrifying creature. Just as the creature reached the window, the lights flickered and went out. The house was plunged into complete darkness. Anya could hear the creature's heavy breathing, its ragged gasps filling the silence. She closed her eyes, waiting for the inevitable. Then, suddenly, the lights came back on. The creature was gone, vanished into the storm. Anya stood there, trembling, her heart pounding in her chest. She had survived, but the experience had left her shaken to her core. As the storm raged on outside, Anya huddled under her blanket, her mind racing. She knew that she would never forget what she had seen that night. The memory of the creature, its glowing eyes and chilling presence, would haunt her for the rest of her life. The following day, the sun peeked through the storm-tossed clouds, casting a sickly yellow glow over the once vibrant landscape. Anya awoke with a start, her heart pounding in her chest. The memory of the previous night's terrifying encounter was still fresh in her mind. She got up and looked out the window. The garden, usually a peaceful oasis, was a scene of devastation. Trees were uprooted, branches were scattered everywhere, and the once pristine lawn was a muddy mess. A shiver ran down Anya's spine as she remembered the creature that had emerged from the storm. Determined to forget the ordeal, Anya decided to go for a walk. She bundled up and ventured out into the neighborhood. The streets were quiet, the residents still recovering from the storm. As she walked, Anya couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She glanced over her shoulder, but there was nothing there. The feeling intensified as she approached the old cemetery at the end of the street. A cold wind whipped through the trees, sending their skeletal branches rattling against each other. Anya hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest, but she forced herself to continue, her curiosity overcoming her fear. As she walked through the cemetery, Anya felt a sense of unease. The gravestones seemed to lean in towards her, their inscriptions etched with strange, unfamiliar symbols. The air was thick with a heavy, oppressive silence. Suddenly, Anya heard a noise behind her. She turned, her heart pounding in her chest. There, standing at the edge of the cemetery, was the creature she had seen the night before. It was watching her, its glowing eyes filled with a cold, predatory hunger. Anya screamed and turned to run, but it was too late. The creature lunged forward, its long, skeletal fingers reaching out for her. She stumbled and fell, her ankle twisting painfully. The creature was upon her, its claws inches from her face. Just as it was about to strike, a blinding light filled the cemetery. The creature let out a blood-curdling scream and vanished into the darkness. Anya lay on the ground, panting, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked up, her eyes wide with fear. Standing before her was a tall figure cloaked in shadow. The figure raised its hand and the light faded, leaving the cemetery once again plunged into darkness. Anya tried to call out, but no sound would come. The figure approached her slowly, its footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. Anya could feel its presence, a cold, chilling sensation that seemed to seep into her bones. She closed her eyes, waiting for the inevitable. Then, suddenly, the figure was gone. Anya opened her eyes, her heart pounding in her chest. She was alone, the cemetery silent and deserted. She tried to stand, but her ankle throbbed with pain. She managed to crawl to a nearby bench and collapsed, her body trembling. As she lay there, trying to gather her strength, Anya thought about the strange events of the past few days. The storm, the creature, the mysterious figure. What did it all mean? Was she losing her mind? Just as she was about to give up hope, she heard a faint rustling in the bushes. She looked up, her heart pounding in her chest. A small, furry creature emerged from the undergrowth. It was a rabbit, its eyes wide with fear. Anya smiled, a small flicker of hope returning to her heart. Perhaps, after all, she wasn't alone. The sky was a canvas of bruised dark hues, the clouds scudding across like panicked herds. Thunder rumbled from the heavens, a distant, ominous growl that seemed to echo through my very bones. I huddled in the corner of my attic room, the only place that offered a semblance of security against the tempest raging outside. The wind howled like a banshee, rattling the windows and sending shivers down my spine. Rain lashed against the glass, creating a steady, rhythmic beat that was both soothing and terrifying. A particularly violent gust shook the house, and a loose tile clattered to the roof, sending a jolt of fear through me. I tried to focus on the flickering candlelight, its dancing shadows casting grotesque shapes on the walls. A sudden, blinding flash of lightning illuminated the room, revealing the distorted reflection of my face in the mirror. My eyes, wide with terror, seemed to bore into my soul. A low growl echoed through the house, a sound that was both animalistic and supernatural. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, a chilling reminder of the unseen forces that lurked in the darkness. I clutched the candle tighter, my heart pounding in my chest. The thunderclaps grew louder, more frequent, and more terrifying. Each one seemed to shake the very foundations of the house, sending tremors through the floorboards. I could feel the walls trembling, as if they were about to collapse. A particularly violent gust of wind tore through the attic, sending a gust of cold air into the room. I shivered uncontrollably, my teeth chattering. The candle flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. Panic surged through me as I groped around for a light switch. My hands fumbled with the wall, my heart pounding in my ears. Just when I thought I was about to give up, my fingers found the switch and flipped it. The room was bathed in a soft, yellow glow. I looked out the window, but the storm had passed. The sky was a peaceful, serene blue, and the only sound was the gentle rustling of leaves. I breathed a sigh of relief, but the fear that had gripped me earlier lingered. As I lay in bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister had been lurking in the shadows. The storm had been more than just a natural phenomenon. It had been a manifestation of something dark and terrifying, and I knew that I would never forget the night the storm came. The following day, the sun shone brightly, dispelling the dark clouds that had gathered the previous night. The storm had passed, leaving behind a trail of fallen branches and uprooted trees. The air was crisp and clean, and the birdsong filled the garden with a cheerful melody. Despite the serene atmosphere, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had gripped me the night before. The storm had been more than just a natural phenomenon. It had been a manifestation of something dark and terrifying, and I knew that I would never forget the night the storm came. As I wandered through the garden, I noticed a strange, pulsating glow emanating from beneath a fallen oak tree. Curiosity piqued. I approached the tree and carefully brushed away the leaves. To my astonishment, I discovered a small, spherical object embedded in the ground. It was about the size of a tennis ball, and it pulsated with an eerie, otherworldly light. I reached out to touch it, but my hand froze in midair. A wave of nausea washed over me, and I felt a cold chill run down my spine. The object seemed to be alive, pulsing with a sinister energy that sent shivers down my back. Suddenly, the object began to glow brighter, and a low, guttural growl echoed through the garden. I turned to run, but it was too late. A shadowy figure emerged from the darkness, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It moved with a fluid grace that belied its monstrous appearance, its long, skeletal limbs reaching out towards me. I screamed and tried to run, but my legs felt like lead. The creature was upon me, its claws raking across my skin. I fought back with all my might, but it was no use. The creature was stronger, faster, and more relentless than anything I had ever encountered. Just as I thought all hope was lost, a blinding flash of light illuminated the garden. The creature let out a blood-curdling scream and vanished into the darkness. I collapsed to the ground, exhausted and terrified. When I regained consciousness, I found myself lying in my bed. The sun was shining through the window, casting a warm glow on the room. I looked around, but there was no sign of the creature that had attacked me. I got out of bed and went downstairs to investigate. The garden was a mess, with fallen branches and uprooted trees scattered everywhere. But there was no sign of the pulsating object or the creature that had emerged from it. As I stood in the garden, looking out at the peaceful landscape, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. The storm had not been a coincidence. It had been a harbinger of something sinister, and I knew that I would never be the same again. The following days were a blur of fear and uncertainty. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something sinister was lurking in the shadows. The creature that had attacked me had vanished without a trace, but I knew it was still out there, waiting for its next victim. I tried to go about my daily routine, but it was difficult to focus. The fear was always there, a constant nagging presence in the back of my mind. I avoided going out alone, and I kept the doors and windows locked at all times. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a noise downstairs. My heart pounded in my chest as I listened intently. The noise was faint, but it was definitely there. I got out of bed and crept downstairs, my hands trembling. The house was dark, except for a sliver of moonlight that illuminated the living room. As I approached the living room, I saw a shadowy figure standing by the window. It was the creature from the garden, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. I froze in terror, my blood running cold. The creature turned and looked at me, a sinister smile spreading across its face. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The creature lunged at me, its claws outstretched. Just as it was about to strike, a blinding flash of light filled the room. The creature let out a blood-curdling scream and vanished into the darkness. I collapsed to the ground, exhausted and relieved. When I regained consciousness, I found myself lying in my bed. The sun was shining through the window, casting a warm glow on the room. I looked around, but there was no sign of the creature that had attacked me. I got out of bed and went downstairs to investigate. The living room was a mess, with furniture overturned and broken glass scattered everywhere. But there was no sign of the creature that had attacked me. As I stood in the living room, looking out at the peaceful landscape, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The creature was gone, and I was safe. But the experience had changed me forever. I had faced the darkness, and I had survived. I knew that I would never be the same again. The fear would always be there, a constant reminder of the dangers that lurked in the shadows. But I also knew that I was stronger than I had ever thought. I had faced my fears, and I had come out the other side. And so I went on with my life, determined to live each day to the fullest. I knew that the darkness was always there, but I also knew that I had the power to overcome it.